Uh, Thank you, Ference. So I thought that Ference would be talking about high culture, and it would be the perfect foil for me to be the low culture guy, but clearly that's not going to happen. So
I avoid that.
I know the joke was going to write itself, but sadly somebody else had other plans. But uh, anyways, I had to spend more time in New York City, which no doubt counts as one of the greatest cities our civilization has produced. But there's something about urban cultural progressivism that is irritating and frankly downright gauche. And it is the fetish for a certain form of low culture. Not the subaltern necessarily, but rather the lowest, basest forms of low culture, from jumping turnstiles to graffiti and vandalism and everything in between. I found myself at a comedy show, for instance, on Wednesday, and the jokes were stayed in praise of the socialist who won the Democratic Party's primary for the New York City mayor, with the usual disgust towards those who enjoy classical music and other fine things. The comedian, who had recently appeared on The Tonight Show, repeated the quip that was easier to be. It was worse to come out as a conservative in New York City than it was to be a homosexual in New York in the 1960s. Today, it is possible to take a class on Beyonce and on Taylor Swift and all sorts of things, including hip hop, at universities all across the spectrum. Liberal institutions frame engagement with previously marginalized forms as progressive sophistication, attending hip hop exhibitions, discussing fan fiction scholarship, romanticy, as my neighbor Ross Douthit knows all too well, or supporting street art. It indicates cultural awareness and a commitment to social justice. But this fetish of the low obscures the high, the great, the sacrosanct. Cultural conservatives, on the other hand, have long emphasized the importance of high culture. Roger Scruton's "I drink, therefore I am" is a thoroughly Kantian take on the Cartesian phrase. Elsewhere, Sir Roger's written on the opera, on high architecture, on high art. Conservatives in the Anglo-American tradition have engaged in appreciation of what we can reasonably call high culture, of classical music, of opera, of fine art. There's much to be exalted in the great books, a tradition that binds us together and is our entail. I'm a product of one such undergraduate program, but sitting side to side with this is a strong disavowal of low culture. As Chris pointed out to me right before we began, Sir Roger was not a big fan of Oasis, a band that I love very much. Uh, Alan Bloom proudly declaimed Mick Jagger as the devil incarnate, and I quote, "of the low rock world," in his otherwise magisterial closing of The American Mind, arguing that rock music ruins the imagination of young people and makes it difficult for them to have a passionate relationship to the art and thought that are the substance of liberal education. Bloom continues, "But rock music has one appeal only, a barbaric appeal to sexual desire, not love, not eros, but sexual desire undeveloped and untutored. Young people know that rock has the beat of sexual intercourse." Alan Bloom clearly wasn't a fan. Looming in the background is the populist politics of rural resentment, which are untenable in a world of rampant urbanization. According to the World Bank, a majority of the world's population already lives in cities. By 2050, the number will be almost 70%. If rampant and overwhelming urbanization is the trajectory that we are to follow, we ought to pay more attention to the political forms that form the most immediate interactions of citizens with political life. The city. If the trajectory of contemporary conservatism is defined by the flight from the city, retreating to the countryside with no hope for urban life, then there's no hope for electoral success in the future. The unfashionability of conservatism in the contemporary American city stems from the rightly perceived parochialism and lack of cosmopolitanism, and conservatives have done little to assist their own rebranding in this department. On the other hand, we're confronted by coverage of struggling urban conservatives in the popular press. New York Magazine's January 2025 covered featured MAGA parties and signs of an evolving party scene in New York. Having been to some of those, I will say they're patently insufferable. Even the New York Post and the New York Times have made note of the phenomenon. It is not that there are no urban conservatives. It merely remains that the vast majority of them don't belong in polite society and never have and never will, while simultaneously genuflecting to Burke's dictum that chivalry is dead and they're going to bring it back, on ketamine, of course. The urban conservative today is listless, without vital energy, timotic, but lacking a redemptive arc. Caught between this battle of cultural progressivism and high culture preservation is the middle brow, which is best represented by urban cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism isn't merely being a citizen of the world in the sense that the Stoics used that word. Cicero argued that all human beings are bonded together, along with the gods, in a community made of the cosmos as a whole and based on shared reason. Even a man so devoted to the Roman Republic found himself expressing cosmopolitan sentiments. I thought that I'd offer two or three models, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stick with one, something that is very close to me. And that is a figure that is kind of mythic. It's almost like the snow leopard. You go and search for it in the Himalayas and you don't really find it. It's the Country Club Republican. But the 20th century's egalitarianism sought to produce obituaries of the Country Club Republican time and time again, from George H.W. Bush to Mitt Romney to John Boehner, and countless other down-the-ballot candidates who suffered diatribes and broadsides for supposedly being out of touch, of cloistering themselves behind imposing-looking clubhouses and defending their solitude, leisure, and privacy with golf clubs and squash rackets. The term, however, appears to have fallen out of favor today, whether as a proud self-descriptor or as a slur. The origins of the term, however, reveal something prescient about the history of clubs and of conservative politics in the United States. Our story begins in 1862, when the Union, led by General Grant, was in less than optimal condition. A succession of long-drawn military engagements combined with mounting losses on the battlefield and a virtual stalemate to a war that seemed to have no end in sight. Abraham Lincoln's presidency was truly not at its high-water mark. However, Lincoln's great advancement of Frederick Law Olmsted, who you might know as the designer of Central Park, and five other northeastern grandees to the sanitation committee proved pivotal. Olmsted, who would later find fame as a landscape architect, managed to obtain a vague warrant from the War Department and mobilize civilian resources to aid and buttress a struggling, depleted Union army. That year, supporters of the Sanitation Commission founded the first Union League Club in Philadelphia, and the following year, New York and Chicago followed. Thus begins the intimate association of clubland with the Republican Party and the Union cause. The Union League clubs were not merely locations for society teas and luncheons for the ton masquerading as clubs to aid the Union cause. At the Union League Club of Chicago and of New York, new members are required to swear oaths to propagate the civic good and contribute to the preservation of the Union. The historian of the Union League Club of Chicago and fellow Country Club Republican political science PhD holder James Nolan opens his history by remarking that the Union League Club was founded in 1862 in Pekin, Illinois, to battle conspiracy on the home front. Throughout the Civil War, the Union League clubs of Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia worked tirelessly to fund regiments for the Union Army, sending supplies to the front, thwarting espionage and sabotage. In 1864, the Union League clubs aided in marshaling support for the re-election of President Lincoln. The connections between the Union League clubs and the newly ascended Republican Party have been forged by the crucible of the Civil War and by an enduring love for the Union. Thus was born the first incarnation of the Country Club Republican. The progenitor of the 20th century Country Club Republican was quite a remarkable figure. Shaped by the Civil War, he would be unlikely to fly a Confederate flag, even for ostensibly cultural reasons, or adopt a feckless revisionism that the Southern agrarians peddled in their misplaced nostalgia for the agrarianism of the plantation, for he would default on the oath he swore when he would become a member. Great people only served on one side, not both. There was one side of history you wanted to be on, and that was the Unions. It was certainly not the case that Country Club Republicans only fought fashionable battles. In 1863, both in Chicago and in New York, anti-slavery was a deeply unpopular position. But there were concerns about classical liberal values, the covenant upon which the United States was founded, and the Union League Club of New York's history reminds its readers of a certain judge and congressman, Aaron Vanderpoel, who appeared before the club in March of 1865 and expressed contrition about preventing John Quincy Adams from preventing a petition to liberate 9 female slaves, ruling that they could not be free because they were not citizens. I quote, "I tell you that for years before this rebellion, we at the North lived under the tyranny of slaveholders," Vanderpool recounted. "I see now that when I was in Congress, almost every important vote that I gave was dictated by them and given under the plantation lash." It was unmistakable that the clubmen of the Union Leagues had what Theodore Roosevelt's son, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., described as a club that had a blended socio-political character. The ethic that dominated the early country club Republican was a patrician service to the nation, even in the midst of leisure and sociability, or whilst racked with crises. The clubs were not mere sites of frivolity, though there was always some joy, some gallivanting, but there was never mistaking the public service and duty that was at the heart of it. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to start wrapping up, but I think what's really important is that of all the models that I think are important for the sake of cultural renewal, from the Country Club Republican to the Sloane Rangers for the Brits in the audience, they all represent variations on the Ciceronian theme, intelligent particularism that opens to universal human experience. Demonstrates that conservatives need to not retreat from urban cosmopolitan life, but can offer distinctive contributions to it, contributions desperately needed in our fractured cultural moment. What these models offer is an alternative to cultural polarization defining contemporary American cultural life. Instead of the cultural left's systematic elevation of subaltern forms, or the cultural right's defensive championing of classical hierarchies, they represent comfortable cultural eclecticism that can appreciate both high and low culture without fetishizing either. This is precisely what's missing from contemporary cultural discourse. The handbooks demonstrate that it's possible to create cultural products that are both democratically accessible and aesthetically sophisticated, something that our contemporary moment seems almost incapable of producing.
Conclusion?
Yes. I did have to turn the page, though.
Sometimes you have to.
Sometimes we do, right? Uh, uh, in an, this is, just to wrap up, I think this is the cultural, cosmopolitan conservative alternative. Culturally confident, intellectually curious, democratically accessible, but also at the same time offering a clear vision of life, of etiquette, of social responsibility, of living with people across generations, of learning social graces, of learning how to dine, and learning etiquette even under pressure. It is easy to be nice when you're around other people. It's a lot harder to be nice when your heart rate's 185 and you're on the losing end of a tennis game and you really want to win. But there is something about that form of etiquette that is learned under pressure and reinforced day after day with people across generations, where you learn to win and you learn to lose and you learn to avoid saying things precisely because you want to say them, but it's not the right time and it's not the right place. It creates a certain kind of person that is much more culturally responsible, much more culturally sophisticated, and it is exactly the sort of model that we need moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ishaan.